Yeah, Chimo, greetings everyone. We're just allowing people to come in. And as people are coming in, we're going to put a couple of links in the chat room. Also, if you have any issues with the video, the imagery, or anything moving slow, just let me know so I can sometimes, when Zoom has a lot of people on the piece, it may slow up, so we can just switch it. We can go in and go back out, and that normally takes care of it. Okay, so we just put a link in the chat room. Actually, let me put one more link in the chat room. All right. Okay, so first of all, let me see. Can you all see this image? Is it coming up clear?
Yes.
Okay, MEDUT. Okay, so the very first link in the chat room. So what we've done here, the first link is the PDF file for this book. This is the book that we will be using, and we put the PDF on the website today. So that first link is just in case you want to, download it yourself or follow along through the link. We'll be showing it, of course, on the screen, but as a resource for you, we posted it today. And let me just make sure everybody can get in here, and we're going to get started in 1 minute.
Kwesi, can you please check that first link because it's not pulling up anything for me.
Okay, hold on 1 second. Okay, give me 1 second. Let me make sure it's the right address. And as we're doing that, again, if people are just coming in, if you have any issues with the imagery, just let me know, and we can address that. I'm gonna upload it one more time real quick, just to make sure. Okay, so it should be, it'll be uploading in a minute or two. It should be done. And as that's coming up, let me let these people in. Okay. So it's uploading now. So most of the people are in right now. So first of all, your GMO greetings. Medinde Odwirafo Kwesi Ptah Akan. That means my name is Kwesi Odwirafo Kwesi Ptah Akan. Odwirafo of Akwamu Mine Amarukai TV Mudi Akwamu Nation in North America within Ojira Mine, the purified nation, Afurakani people in the Western Hemisphere. What we wanted to do with this particular course is to first and foremost go through this book. This book, Let the Ancestors Speak, Removing the Veil of Mysticism from MEDUT NTORO, by the brother Ankmi Ra, who is an ancestor now. He published the book in '94. This is one of the few books written on the language by one of our people, a very good book, very thorough book, and so forth. So the book is out of print. So we had to go to scribe.com. Somebody had uploaded it to scribe.com, and we, downloaded it from scribe.com. Now, let me check to make sure. Give me 1 second. Let me make sure this. Okay, so it should be up right now. So if you click on the link in the chat room, it should be working. If not, I'll just email you the link. We're gonna go over the book, of course, in the course of the class, but I just tried to upload it. All right, and make sure everybody turn off your mic so there's no background noise. But okay, so I just tried to upload it again. It looks like it didn't upload, but I'll email you the link. But this is the book we're going through now. The reason why we're doing it like this, there are many books about reading and writing the language of the MEDUT NTORO, most of them written by Europeans and so forth, but there are many courses, many classes, many books. The reason we're doing the course is because we want to introduce, and sometimes people will try to introduce the notion of reading and writing the language as though it's some arcane experience and only a small group of people have the capacity to really study the language. There are many books that you can study on your own and learn how to read and write and learn what the basic symbols mean and how to translate text and so forth. So it's not some small group of, special individuals or initiates who can learn how to read and write the language, just like you can learn how to read and write English, or you can learn how to read and write languages from the continent of Africa of Africa. The difference is when you understand cosmology, African or African ancestral cosmology, which is born of ancestral religion, and ancestral religion is animated by ritual practice. When we communicate with the Abosom, which is the Akan term for deities, when we communicate with the Orisha, the Yoruba term for deities, the Vodou, the Ewe term for deities, the Ntoro too, as we will see, is the name for deities in ancient Kemet, the typical name. When we communicate with, we're possessed by, through spirit possession and spirit communication by the divinities. This is where we learn cosmology from. Then, of course, we laid that cosmology out. It's expressed through the language and so forth. So there are things that we have insight on with regard to the language and culture and ritual practice when we engage the ritual practice ourselves. So we can have insight into what the language is actually saying, as opposed to, you can see the symbol for the letter N and it's the N sound, or the letter F and it's the F sound and the sound and so forth. And you know that word is nefer and so forth. But what does that really represent cosmologically in relationship to the divinity that carries that name, and how does she operate in creation, and why does she show up in different places in the text of Kemet, as well as across the board on the continent? We have insight into that, and we can provide insight so we can have a better understanding of what the texts are actually saying. So So just to give some background real quick, I'm going to switch over. So we'll be using this book, Let the Ancestors Speak. We also will look at the Hieroglyphic Dictionary 2-volume set. And you've probably seen this, archive.org. We have that link in the chat room. You can download this 2-volume set. It's over 1,000 pages, written by Budge, but this is where they collected, MEDUT glyphs from various dynasties all over Kemet. So there's thousands of years worth of, text and textual references and so forth. It's one of the most extensive dictionaries. Then we also have the Mark Vigas Dictionary, the Gardner list and so forth. But you can download the 2-volume set for free on archive.org for Wallace Budge's dictionary. So we'll be going through that as well. But let's put something together real quick. So to give an example of giving insight. So myself, my name is Kwesi Nehem Ptah Akan. Akan is the last name for a number of reasons. One, because that's my ancestry, learning of ancestry through practice of ancestry religion, ancestral communication and so forth. Akan people, they're the dominant group in Ghana, as well as Ivory Coast. There are over 20 million Akan people on the continent. Some of us were forced from the Ghana and Ivory Coast regions into North Central South America, the Caribbean, and Europe during the Kwesi, the Great Perversity, the enslavement era, and this is how Akan people ended up here. Just like a number of our people are Yoruba and ended up here. Some people are Igbo, some people are Bakongo, some people are Basa and Fula and Fang and so forth. So we learned of our ancestral descent directly from our ancestresses and ancestors through ritual practice. Akan ancestry religion was preserved in the blood circles of our people for over 300 years in North America as the hoodoo tradition. The term hoodoo is from the Akan term umdu, which means medicine from roots, trees, and plant life, which is root work and so forth. It also means to become heavy with the spirit through spirit possession and spirit communication. So we continue the Akan ancestry religion as the hoodoo tradition. Just like Yoruba people forced into North America, they continued the Yoruba ancestral religion under the term and form juju, which is a Yoruba term. And Ewe people, when they were forced into North America, they continued the Ewe ancestral religion under the Ewe term voodoo, and Wanga from the Ovambo people. So we maintained our ancestral religious practices. So we can use comparisons since we know that we're descendant from our ancestresses and ancestors in ancient Kamit and Kemet. And since we know we migrated to different parts of the continent, we can look at the living languages today, and you'll find the same words, same concepts, same deities, same functions in creation, same sacred colors in the Akan language and ritual culture and ancestral religion, same with the Yoruba and Ewe and so forth. Since I'm Akan, we give that kind of focus. So, for example, let's give you a quick breakdown. This is one of the articles we published, and to date I've published 31 books and we have some more coming out, but this is an article that I published a while back, Akan vocalizations of our ancestral language of Kemet, just to give you some insight. Now, if we talk about Akan people, just like other groups on the continent, migrating from ancient Kamit or Nubia after the fall of Kemet and Nubia and so forth, and migrated west and reestablished our culture in the western part of the continent over 2,000 years ago. Then after Muslim invasions coming to the empire of Akana or Ghana, the Akan Empire, then we moved further south towards the forest belt where Ghana and Ivory Coast are now. And we reestablished Akana civilization. And we continued that process for the next few hundred years. And then at that point, some of us were taken from that region and forced into the Western Hemisphere during enslavement. If we know that process happened, then there should be some evidence in the language that it happened. The Akan people should be using the same terms with the same definitions with the same meanings. Our Nananom and Samanfo, our spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors, informed us that the Akan language is directly descendant of ancient Kamit and Kemet, meaning Nubia and Egypt, but then directed us to evidence of that. So if you look at the Asante Fanti dictionary, the Tree dictionary, the Akan dictionary that was written in the 1800s, one of the most extensive dictionaries, and that is And if you're not able to see, you should be seeing these images as I go through Dictionary of the Asante and Fanti language, the tree language. If you're not seeing that on the screen, let me know. So this was written in the 1800s when they were sitting down with our people in the forests in Ghana, in the region of Ghana today, asking, you know, people, what is your word? They see a dog go by, what do you all call that? Kramai. They see a cat go by, what do you call that? A cry. They see a, you know, everything, you know, they're just compiling a dictionary in the forest in the so-called 1800s. Now, then we have, as we just showed earlier, the hieroglyphic dictionary. So when you do a comparison, you can test whether or not Akan people are still speaking that same language. And this gives some insight, gives some background. So this is from the hieroglyphic dictionary. If you see in Kamit, term kes, as we're going to see later on tonight, in the over 100 years ago when the hieroglyphic dictionary, this 2-volume set was written, Egyptologists at that point, if they didn't know what the vowels should be, they could see the consonants. For example, this basket is the K sound, the K sound, and this boat is the S sound. So it's KS, KS. But they didn't know what the vowel was because we didn't always include the symbols of the MEDUT that represented vowels. Sometimes we did, and sometimes we did not, because the people knew what the symbols meant and they spoke the language, so they weren't confused. They didn't have to stick a vowel in there. They knew if it was KS, KS, they knew what the vowels were. But reading it thousands of years later, they wouldn't know, is it KOS, KES, KIS? They didn't know what it could possibly be. So it was a convention early on, about 100 years ago, that Egyptologists, if they didn't know what the vowel was, they would just stick an E in between consonants just to facilitate pronunciation until they could figure out what the real vowel placement would be. And if they didn't figure it out, they would just leave an E. So that was a convention. That was just something to keep things moving along. So you see, it's KS, but the Egyptologist was sticking E in between. It really should read technically KS, to chatter foolishly, to jest. In the Coptic dialect, the COPT means Coptic. That's the late version of the language that came into usage about 2,000 years ago at the end of the dynastic period, before, you know, once the Greeks and Romans began to invade. But the Coptic dialect was the last surviving expression of the language. They spelled it KAC, KEC, kaskes, to chatter foolishly, to jest. If you look in the Akan dictionary, you should be able to find a term that means the same thing. In the Akan dictionary, kasa, to talk much, talk noisily, to chatter. So in ancient Kamit, KS, to chatter foolishly, to jest. Every Akan people, every day, we use the term kasa. It means to chatter, to talk much, talk noisily. It's the same meaning, it's the same word. And we have the proper vowel placement because we still speak the language. So it's not kes, it's kasa, because that's how we continue to speak. We still speak the same language. In ancient Kamit, you have hem, and you'll see that doubling principle. You have one word and they'll double it for an emphasis purposes. Hem, to roar, to bellow, cry, roar, bellow, and a battle cry. So hem means a battle cry, a war cry. When warriors are going out on the field and they start running out their spears and shields and they start roaring or yelling or crying out, that's a battle cry, a war cry. The hem is the war cry, the battle cry. There's even a crown in ancient Kamit that has, it's the triple octave crown as they call it. They call that the hem crown because it's the battle cry, war cry, crown. Once again, it's really HM. They're not sure what the vowel placement should be. Even in Coptic, this symbol represents the H and this is the M, so it's HM. They weren't sure what the vowel placement should be, but it's the war cry, battle cry, roaring, and so forth. You look in Akan, hama hama, boisterous. Epo ye hama, this is what an idiom, the sea rages as when or if agitated by a storm, infers raging. Hama hama means to rage, to roar. And then you have the term, the simple term hama means to fight or to brawl. So hama means to fight or to brawl in Akan. It also means to roar or to rage. Hama hama is the fighting, hama, raging, roaring, and so forth. That is the crying, battling, roaring, battle cry. Battle, hama means to brawl or fight in Akan. It also means to roar or to rage. So battle cry is hama hama. We still have the same term, we're speaking the same language. And as you go through, you'll see kai, and it's also spelled in this representation is this K symbol and the A symbol, so it's ka. And then they have the variation kai, to think out, to speak, to say, to tell out, to call out. In Akan, you have ka, to emit a sound, to utter, speak, say, or tell. Same term. And as we go through, sha or shai or shay, to fix, to appoint, to decide, to destine, to predestinate. That's in the language of Kamit. The HY in Akan is the shet sound, so shet, to fix, set up, institute, to predestinate, to predestinate, to appoint, to ordain beforehand, to be predestined. Once again, we have the same terms. ARI, Adi or Edi is the term for the eye, but also a look or a glance. Then you have AN with the determinative symbol of an eye to turn a glance towards something. So whether it's R, the rolling R, which is Edi or Any or Adi, meaning eye, but also to turn a look or a glance. Then you have An, which can also be Ani, to turn a glance, and they have the symbol for the eye. In Akan, Any, the eye or eyes, that's the word for eye in Akan, and it also means a look. So the same thing. You have Ban, to be evil, to be wicked in Kamit. In the Akan language, Bani, bad, evil, wicked. You have Ma, meaning grant or give, grant to me, and so forth. And in Akan, Ma, to give, hand, communicate, bestow, impart, grant, present. So this is just a short list of terms. This article is part of a Akan and ancient Kameti comparative dictionary that we are putting together. It's not just 7 or 8 or 10 words. We have thousands of words. Every root word that you find in the hieroglyphic dictionary, you will find in the Akan language with the same meaning. So we're talking about the very same language. Most languages use about 500 words. If you consistently, if you learn the most popular 500 words in English or Spanish or any other language, then you can work your way around because most people use the same basic terms. There are thousands of terms that are identical in the Akan language that you find in ancient Kanit and Kemet, and the same with the Yoruba and other languages as well. Now to give one more example, which is important. So you have a version, the T sound and the UR sound, TWRA, and also a variation of DWR. They don't know if it's Twara, Twira, Doira, and so forth. It means to be clean, to cleanse, to purify, also to celebrate a ceremony of purification. DWR or TWR, two variations of the same word. It can be TWRA, DWR, or DWRA. In Akan, that TWRA or DWRA is Jira and Ujira. It means to cleanse, to purify, but also Ojira, the yam custom and annual festival celebrated in the month of August or September when the first yam is eaten, to celebrate the yam festival. So Jira in Akan means to purify, Ojira is the noun meaning purification. Jira is the verb meaning to purify. It also means to celebrate a ceremony of purification. The major ceremony of purification, Ojira, is the Akan New Year is called Ojira for many millions of Akan people, because we, in the year, we purify ourselves ritually so we can go into the new cycle clean and focused and, purified and so forth. So it means to purify or purification. It also means to celebrate a ceremony of purification. The major ceremony of purification is the New Year, but we also have a weekly Jira ceremony of purification where we cleanse our head ritually with water and certain other things through ritual prayer and so forth to cleanse the spiritual head on the day of the week that we are born. Now, Akan tradition, my Kradin or soul name is Kwesi, born on Awusida Sunday under the divinity Awusi, so I'm Kwesi and so forth. On Kwesida or Awusida Sunday, I communicate with the divinity that governs my spiritual head and engage the Jira or purification head cleansing ceremony, Okragwade, head washing ceremony, soul washing ceremony, and so forth. The Jira process, the purification process. So it means purification, but it also means to celebrate a ceremony of purification. The Jira or purification ceremony on a weekly basis, the day of the week that you're born every week, but also the year end, the end of one cycle, the beginning of the next, the Ojira ceremony. Now, an Egyptologist could learn that DWR, TWRA, means to purify, to cleanse, to celebrate a ceremony of purification. And they will be absolutely right. But they can't tell you what the ceremony of purification is because they don't practice ancestral religion. And that ceremony did not pass on through their blood circle for thousands of years up into the present day. But it is passed on to us up into the present day, and we still practice that. And it continued even into North America in the Hoodoo tradition. We still engage that ritual cleansing of the spiritual head on specific days and a specific time of the year. So when you have the ancestral religious context, because you're engaged in ancestral religious practice, you have a deeper understanding of what these medutu, what these glyphs mean. So that's why we wanted to get into that. Now, so let's switch over to the book real quick. Just wanted to give a little background. So this is one of the great Ensu, one of the kings, Amenemhat III, and he's just talking about that particular sovereign. And that's a scribe sitting under the animal totem for the divinity Tahuti and so forth. So he's just giving an introduction in the book and talking about why it's important and why we need to study our own language and so forth. So you can read through that. And again, if you can't upload through that link, we're going to email you the book, email you the PDF. Later tonight. Let me make sure that some of the people can get in. All right. So those were people just commenting on the book and so forth. So want to get into it. And the thing is, we just want to be able to walk people through, if you're not familiar with linguistic information and so forth, give you some insight, some detailed insight beyond just the regular, this is the symbol, this is the sound, this is the word, and so forth. So in the first part, he's just talking about proving that, African origins, proving that this is our language. It didn't come from Asia. It didn't come from some mythical people, Hebrews who never existed. It didn't come from Europeans and so forth. Of course, Europeans would like to say that the language is not Afro-Akani, not African and so forth. And, our scholars have dealt with that and proved that, of course, this is our language. So that's what he's talking about in the beginning. So first okay, so the words of the divinity, MEDUT. Med means word or symbol. The plural is MEDUT. And then you'll see NTR. Some people say netter or netcher. You'll see the name of our class is MEDUT NTORO, because in the Akan language, as we will see, the term NTORO, N-T-O-R-O, NTORO means deity. We still use the term NTORO every single day. Egyptologists would see NTR. They didn't know if it was neter or niter or nutor or ntor. They didn't know what the vocalization was. So they would either just write it NTR or sometimes with N-E-T-E-R like neter or netcher and so forth, because they were unaware of what the vocalization is. In our Akan culture, we say Ntoro, that is a term for divinity. Ntorot, and Ntong, Ntorong is the feminine, Ntoro is the masculine. Just like in ancient Kemetic, you have Ntoro is the masculine, Ntorot is the feminine. And many people write it as neter and netert and so forth. It's Ntoro, Ntorot. The term Ntoro, meaning deity in Akan. When you look at the Ewe people in Togo and Benin and some in Ghana and so forth, they say Toro, Toro, T-R-O, Toro, meaning deity, Torowo, meaning plural for divinities. So they say Toro, meaning deity. In Akan, we say Ntoro, meaning divinity. In ancient Kemet, it's Ntoro, not neter, but Ntoro, meaning divinity. We still use that term every single day, representing divinity. So we never stop utilizing that. And the term med or mede, meaning symbol, that is an Akan term, bede meaning symbol or sign. So we can say MEDUT NTORO because we still use that same vocalization to this very day. Now, evolution of the language along the Nile Valley corridor. Divisions of the language. In the early dynasties, so-called pre-dynastic, you'll see Taseti. They're talking about, southern Kemet and into Kamit, so-called Nubia. They'll talk about 6200 to 4200, quote unquote, BCE. The writing of this period included names and titles, labels on storage jars, and inscriptions concerning historical and spiritual events. So a number of different, you see jars, you see vases, you see certain inscriptions and so forth. You don't have long, extensive religious compositions yet in the language, but you have various, labels and burners and things like that that represent those things. As a matter of fact, let me pull up real quick. He mentioned the Kustul. Now I'm gonna switch over real quick. So I just switched over. If you should be seeing Kustul incense burner on the screen. If you're not seeing that, let me know. Sometimes when you switch from a PDF to a internet-based image, sometimes Zoom has a problem, and we have to go out and go back in. But when he said Kustul, you saw that on the link. This is the Kustul incense burner. So they found this incense burner with specific glyphs. You see it says a feline, an antelope, rosette, falcon deity, seated ruler with the white crown, a king sitting on his throne and so forth, a kneeling prisoner inside of a boat, a palace facade. So it says this incense burner is distinctively Nubian in form, carved in the technique of Nubian rock art. It is decorated on the rim with typical Nubian designs. The reason why this Kustul burner is important is because it is Nubian in origin, Kanitu, or Nubian in origin and so forth, but it predated the first dynasty of Kemet. So first they would try to say, well, the first dynasty of Kemet, that was the earliest evidence in the world of a kingship, until they found the Kustul incense burner, which shows the king with the white crown sitting on his throne and holding the flail and so forth, just like they have in ancient Kemet. But centuries before the first dynasty, there was already a representative of a king with the tall white crown that you see Al-Sar wear and so forth. So the Kustul burner was talking about pre-dynastic Kemet in ancient Nubia before Kemet became an empire in the sense that we know now from the first dynasty going forward. So it changed the whole, of course, our people understood that Khanate or Nubia was first and Kemet came later, but the whites and offspring were trying to put forward this false idea, first that Kemet was first, and then that Kemet was, influenced by whites who invaded, established a different civilization and disappeared, which is nonsense. So we're going to go back to the book. So when he says Kustul here, Taseti, which is a representative of Nubia, 6200 to 4200, quote unquote, BCE. So you're talking about 8200 years ago to 6200 years ago. That's one of those incense burners. You saw the glyphs around an incense burner, or sometimes a vase, or sometimes a jar, or a palace facade and things like that. But you didn't have long, extensive papyri or chef d'oeuvre papyri text and extensive, long inscriptions, compositions as of yet. So that's why he's talking about names, titles, labels, storage jars, inscriptions, and so forth. And dynasties of Ptah, Meri, or Kemet. So this is talking about the dynasties, pre-dynastic. When they talk about dynastic, around 4200, quote unquote, BCE and forward, the first, quote unquote, dynasty as far as human kings leading. When you look at the Turin papyrus, and we're going to look at that a little bit later in the class, they talk about the divine dynasties, the rule of the divinities as kings and queens and so forth, going back 42,000+ years. And then, but the first human king dynasty and so forth, going back to like 4200, quote unquote, BCE, or 6,200 years ago. When they talk about divine dynasties or the rules of the deities, they're talking about when a king or queen mother gets possessed by a divinity, spirit possession, just like we have today. When people go to ritual, drums play, the spirit gets in the body, possesses and operates through the person. Now, when you ask the person a question, you're not asking the person, you're asking the deity that has possessed the person. And when they give their admonition or the direction or directive, now that is the rule of the divinities. Then when we learn from them through spirit possession, how to pick herbs to make medicine, how to structure a society, organize it harmoniously, how to engage in ritual practice and so forth, then we preserve that knowledge and then we move forward in that fashion. But they're talking about the divine dynasties and the Turin papyrus going back 42,000+ years. But the first dynasty, they're talking about, quote unquote, the human kings and so forth, under their own rule with the guidance of the divinities. Dynasties 1 through 6, they're talking about the old language of the Kemet. Sometimes they'll say the old kingdom, old empire, and so forth. You'll hear those different terms. Dynasties 1 through 6. 4200 so-called BCE to 3400, King Narmer Menna, the Greeks called him Menes, but it's Menna, rules over a united Kemet. Writing included books written on anatomy. So now they're starting to, compile compositions, not just incense burners, not just plaques, not just jars with inscriptions, but sitting down and writing scrolls, writing the first books and so forth. Books written on anatomy. The instruction of Prince Harjadef recorded the royal annals of the so-called Palermo stone. They're showing, a lineage of kings and so forth. And these are different texts that we're going to look at. For the admonitions of the vizier Kagimini, the maxims of Ptah, which is considered the oldest book in the world, where the elder Ptah, who was 110 years old, gave instructions to his son about how to conduct himself as, as a royal, but also rooted in morality, moral precepts to govern his entire life and every aspect of his life. And he wrote that book, and these are called the maxims or the precepts of Ptah. That is the oldest book in the world. King Unas inscribes his tomb with the earliest known pyramid text. That's going back to, that's around the 5th dynasty and so forth. But this is the old language of Kemet. And just like you have Old English and the way things were written in, English hundreds of years ago, certain things have changed, certain ways that things are pronounced have changed. Same thing with our original ancient ancestral language. You have the old archaic version, which those things are preserved, but then certain things slightly changed as, time goes on. But during dynasties 1 through 6, you have the pyramid texts coming into being, you have these books on anatomy and so forth. Remarkable descriptions of social disorganizations and anarchy, addressed to an aged king in the papyrus of Ipuwer, and known as the admonitions of an Egyptian sage, are, according to Ehrman, to be associated with the end of this reign. So those are some of the more famous and popular texts that were found dated to that period. And then you have, so the scripts that are used, you have the formal script, which is the ideographic text, picture text and so forth, but the MEDUT, the symbols. But then you also have the cursive version, which they would call hieratic in Greek. We have the formal version, but then a shorthand cursive version that was in use as well. So just like we have in English, you can write, you can print, but then you can write in cursive. That comes from our ancient language. And the whites and their offspring, by the way, never created their own script. The alphabet that you see in Greek, Roman, and so forth, derived from Latin, Phoenician, and so forth, that derived directly from the hieratic script of ancient Kemet. And then the Phoenicians, the Black people, went up into Canaan, so-called Canaan, which was later corrupted into now where Israel is and so forth, Palestine, Israel. But our people migrated into those regions from northern Africa, carried the same ancestral religion there that we practiced in ancient Kamit and Kemet, and carried the script. And the Phoenician alphabet became the Latin and the Greek and the Roman and so forth, and eventually English. And you'll see every character taken directly from our original script. The same thing with Sanskrit in India and so forth. You'll see the same thing, as a matter of fact, with cuneiform and Akan, Akkadian Empire, Sumer, and so forth. So the whites and offspring never created any script. They stole our script and claimed it for themselves. Now, so we have the regular print or the regular script, the formal script, and then we have the cursive version of that. Then you get into the middle language of Kemet. People call it the Middle Empire, Middle Kingdom, Middle Empire. Here it says Middle Language. Dynasties 9 through 18, 3200 to around 1350 BCE. They'll talk about this is one of the greatest periods in our history. It says to renew the great Black race, the Kam-Ur and so forth. And the reason why they say that Middle Empire is called the classical stage of the language, and it is on the grammar of this period that we shall focus. So this book is based on quote unquote Middle Kemet language, Middle Kemeti. Many people say Middle Egyptian. So when you look at books like, the book by Allen is very popular, Middle Egyptian and so forth. It was the most, as they say here, the flowery metaphorical style which was in vogue, and the plethora of literary tales and didactic treatises achieved great acclaim, and they were imitated by aspiring scribes throughout the educational system. The wide variety of texts preserved from this period affords us the opportunity of examining mathematical, historical, medical, spiritual, and legal documents in great abundance and detail. So this is why many people focus on the Middle Egyptian or Middle Kemeti dialect, because of all the texts and so forth, spanning a great period, but also covering every aspect of life. So you had what scripts were popular, the formal script, as well as the cursive script. Then you have the late period, dynasties 19 through 24, so-called 1352 BCE to around 700 BCE and so forth. This is the period when foreign words began to contaminate the language. We have people who were, settling in certain parts like Northern Kemet, some people from the Near East and so forth, trying to settle, infecting the language to a certain extent. So you see little words popping up from foreigners, popping up in the language and so forth. Then Dynasty 25 through the Greek and Roman invasion. Dynasty 25, when there was some breakdown, saw some foreign influence, and then the people from Kanit, Nubia, They'll talk about the Nubian dynasty or the Kushite dynasties and so forth. They came and took over Kemet once again, reestablished order, because of course they were all related and so forth. And they were there for, a number of centuries and so forth. But then eventually the Greeks invaded around 332, 333, so-called BCE. They were there for a few hundred years. Then the Romans invaded and so forth. And then after the Romans invaded, hundreds of years later, the Arabs invaded and things started to break down. But Dynasty 25 through the Greek invasion and then Roman invasions, Greeks get there around 332 BCE and so forth, and the Romans around 50. And then the Romans stay up until like the 5th century, quote unquote AD and so forth. The Demotic form, the popular or indigenous form of writing, was a very fast cursive. So they had another cursive form. They had the regular formal MEDUT NTORO. They had the cursive version, and they had that going back a couple of thousand years. But then in the late period, they had even another cursive version that they called Demotic, which was a little bit simpler than the hieratic. And of course, the Greek term is hieroglyph. The term is MEDUT NTORO, which means the divine, the words of the divine, or the symbols, the MEDUT of the divinity or the divine. Now you have, as we mentioned earlier, the Coptic form of the language, and all that's going back to 400 quote unquote AD to around 640 AD. It came into usage and became popular about 2,000 years ago, but then it started really picking up around 400 quote unquote AD until the Arabs invaded in the so-called 600s, and then Arabic took over. They started forcing Arabic on the people, even though the people still continued to speak Coptic, but Coptic is the final version, surviving version of the ancient language in that region. Now, some of our people around that time, when the Greeks and the Romans and so forth, invaded, we left and migrated to West Africa, Central and South, carrying the ancestral religion and the language with us. That includes Akan people and Yoruba people, Ewe and so forth. But the Coptic dialect, the last form, says the form is just the spoken language of Kemet, but it's written with the Greek alphabet, supplemented with 7 symbols from the indigenous language of Kemet. So instead of writing it, they're still speaking their same language, but instead of writing it in the MEDUT NTORO in our script, they started using Greek letters to write it. They included the Greek letters, which actually originally came from our script anyway, but then they came in the quote unquote Greek form. And then they included 6 symbols, MEDUTU, that the Greek alphabet didn't have, sounds that the Greek alphabet didn't have. They included 6 symbols. So they were still speaking the language, but instead of speaking the language and writing it in our own script, they were speaking their indigenous language, but writing it with the Greek script. Just like, let's switch over just to give you an example of what we're talking about. There's a Santi Fanti language, the Akan language, also called the tree language. So this is the tree dictionary. Okay, so if you see fofo, a plant with a yellow flower and so forth, the word is fofo, but they're using the English language or English characters, the F, the O, and so forth, the English to write out their language. So Akan people are not using an Akan script with their own symbols. If they're writing out Akan language like fofo or foam or mfom, famho, and so forth, they're using English characters to represent the sounds of their indigenous language. That's what was happening in ancient Kemet. We were speaking our language, but we were using the Greek letters to represent the sounds. The Coptic dialect ended up doing that. So, and that was in the late period after the Greeks invaded and so forth. Okay. So let's get back to the book. And that's important because you'll see, very often you'll see the Coptic spellings of words, you know, as well as the formal MEDUT. So approximately 9 dialects of Coptic. People still speak Coptic today in Kemet right now. The old dialect of Upper Kemet, Akhmenic, you have Sahidic and Bohairic. These are major dialects still being spoken now. For example, in the Coptic church and so forth, they're still speaking it. And then indigenous Black people who still live in Kemet and Khanid and Nubia still speak the language. So they'll say this was the most vulgar form of the language of Kemet. It was used for everyday writing, legal documents, letters, religious compositions, graffiti. It was used from the late Roman period until the Arab invasion. And once the Arabs invaded around the 6th century and onward, then the Arabic language was forced on the people and people were forced to write in Arabic and so forth. So, and he mentions here that the Greeks adopted their alphabet from the Phoenicians, meaning the Black people in Kanana or Phoenicia, Chahi, which became Phoenicia. The Greeks called it Phoenicia and so forth, from thank you, that they were called in ancient Kemet. The region of quote unquote Palestine and Israel now, the Phoenicians had a modified version of the script of Kemet, and that alphabetic script, the Greeks took that and utilized that same script, changed the form slightly of the letters, but you can still see they're the same form, and called it the Greek alphabet, which is, of course, they stole the script. Now, so first thing we need to understand when you're talking about beauty and symmetry, the way the language is written, the way the MEDUTU, the symbols are written. Quadrangular forms. So they talk about an inviolable law that this writing take a quadrangular form. This inviolable law is called by some scholars the square principle. And that's important when we're reading the language because they utilize it. It's similar to an artistic canon. An artistic canon is a certain set of rules. So when you see, for example, in ancient Kemet, when you see the men and the women, they're all slender, they all, you know, none of them are overweight typically, except for a couple of dynasties when they show people in their natural state, but they show the cultural and moral ideal of the man, woman, and child. So they're all slender, they look focused, they look healthy, they upright, and you know, there's an idea or ideal of perfection. That's an artistic canon that they adhere to. So nobody's slumped over and everything else. The same thing with regard to the way the language is written. There's an artistic canon or the square principle written in quadrangular form. It's an artistic canon, but it also has to do spiritually why they do that. So you'll see the square principle. So the symbols are placed in imaginary squares and the upper ones take precedence over the lower. So for example, Ari, Nka, Alter, Kemet. You have the I, which is Ari, the wavy line, the water line, which is the N sound, the basket, which is the K sound, the two walking legs, the A sound, and the chick, which is the U, and the loaf of bread, which is the T. Now, they don't write it with symbols just one in front of the other. They don't have the Ari, N, K. They have it in a quadrangular form, and the upper one takes precedence over the lower. So instead of writing the first symbol here, the next symbol here, and the next symbol here, they put it into squares. And the entire language is written in that quadrangular form. So you have Ari, K, and then you have A, Tur, and then you have the flaming piece of charcoal, the Kum sound, the loaf of bread, which is the T, Kemet, and then you have the symbol that represents a nation or a polity, which is the Newt symbol, but it's not vocalized. That's the country. This is the country or nation of Kemet. So, but as you can see, it's quadrangular form. He says beauty was so important that if a word did not form a quadrangle, the scribe misspelled it rather than create an unsightly grouping. For instance, the preposition keft, the cuss sound and the F sound, the little snake, the viper is the F and the T. meaning in accordance with or in front of, is usually written. So that's not a quadrangular form. So they decided to make it into a square instead of one on top of the other. They would usually write it in a square form, so it becomes K, F, and then T next, because they wanted to make it a square instead of, perpendicular. So they had to move one of the symbols over so it can fit into that square canon. So you have to read it K, KHFT, and the H with the symbol under the bottom is the K sound. So they would do it like that. The scribe also had the latitude of reducing or enlarging a sign. So the bird can be large, or they could shrink the bird so that they can stick the wavy line on top so it could still fit in a little square form. So they could expand it or contract. Just like we expand pictures on our iPhone or shrink them and so forth, they would do the same thing to conform to that square principle. Some signs were placed vertically, like this is a scroll, or horizontally to maintain symmetrical correctness. The scribes adhere to the quadrangular shape, not only for the beauty, it also has significance for the initiate. That quadrangular form is representative of the ritual enclosure, the sanctuary, the inner sanctuary of the temple, the shrine space where we go into the shrine space. If you have a shrine in your house, an ancestral shrine, if you practice hoodoo or juju or voodoo and so forth, you have a shrine to your ancestresses and ancestors. We have a shrine to the divinities that govern your head and your matriclan and patriclan. And we give offerings to these divinities. When you go into the shrine space, it's that quadrangular space. That quadrangular space is representative of the ritual enclosure where ritual invocation takes place. So it's not just beauty and symmetry, it has more to do with that. Now, orientation. Kemetu, the U at the end, as we're going to see, is plural. People of Kemetu wrote from right to left, and occasionally, so right to left, and occasionally for specific purposes, they wrote from left to right. The direction in which the plants and animals faced determined the direction in which an inscription is read. So you look into the face of the animal, you face the animal, and you go in that direction. So since the chick is facing this direction, you look into his or her face and you read in that direction. So this is chick represents the oo sound, and the wavy line is the N, and this is the B and so forth. But that's uben, it's a quadrangle, uben and so forth. And then you have the Ra, the open mouth is the R, and the forearm is the Ah sound, and the circle with the dotted nose is the Sun, Ra, and then the owl, and Pet. So you're looking in this direction. In that particular case, if the animals are facing this way, then you look into the face of the animal and you read in that direction. So since the animal is looking this way, looking to the right and so forth, you face the animal, you look into the animal's face and you keep reading in that direction. And these, we have to go through these building blocks first before we get into, text and so forth. So we have to, go through this aspect of it. So they give an example of specific purpose that would influence the direction of the characters is when they are used around the doorway. This placement is a good example of an advanced culture marked by refinement and social grace, owing to the fact that no symbol had the temerity to turn its back upon anyone walking through the door. This arrangement also makes reading the inscription much easier for the person walking through the door. So here's a doorway. So if you're walking through the door, and if you stand in the doorway and you look up, if you look in this direction, you look into the face of the person or the animal, you read from, in this case, this direction, and then you look to your right, you read the same text, they just put the same text, but in the other direction. What if they had them all facing the same direction? Then this set of glyphs, this particular divinity would have his back to the person standing right here looking up. He would have his back to him or her. But since they are facing inward, the animal or the divinity or the individual would never have his back to the person who's looking up to read. So from on this side, they can read the text from your face in that direction. On this side, you can read the same text in the other direction. And even he has Ankh, Me, Ra. He put his name, that's the name of the author of the book, and he stuck his name in there just as an example, but that's Ankh, Me, Ra. So he mentions as the African-American classical music of jazz treats the ear and soul to a veritable feast, the multiple simultaneous meanings on many levels of MEDUT NTORO treat the eye and the soul to a feast as well. So now that we know that there are quadrangle forms, you're reading into the face of the animal or the person or the divinity, whether it's reading from right to left, which is typically the way it's written, or left to right. And sometimes, you know, in columns, you're still reading, you know, from right to left, for example, facing or going into the eye of the person and so forth, but you're reading from top down if it's in a column. You're not reading from bottom up, you're reading from top down. So you're reading into the face of the glyphs, then you go to the next row, the next row, and the next row, and the next row. Okay, so now that we know the quadrangular form, that's the artistic canon, and the direction things are read, now the phonograms. And of course, if anybody has any questions, you can post them in the chat room. Okay. Now, phonograms. And there are certain things that just have to be memorized. He has the, you know, the list of the symbols and so forth in here, so it's a great reference, so you can always go back. Just like mastering a language is not, you've memorized every single aspect of it. Back in the day, before there was the internet, if you looked at an Oxford dictionary, maybe this thick, tens of thousands of words, most people who speak English and teach English and so forth, and they go to other countries and teach English, they have to memorize every single one of those tens of thousands of words in the English language. But because they know the sounds, they know the meanings, they know how to speak, they know how to read English and read words and sound them out, and then they can look in a dictionary reference to see what these words mean, even the archaic words that they're not familiar with, they can always get an answer. You can learn the fundamentals of the language, and as long as you have a reference, like this reference, and, you know, dictionaries and so forth, and then we'll put forward our reference, which will be, as we said earlier, a comparative dictionary of the Akan language and the language of ancient Kamit and Kemet, showing the same words, the same meanings, and thousands of them. That'll be another reference as well. When you come across words you're not familiar with, then you go to the dictionary reference and find the word and say, oh, that's what the word is, that's what it means. Okay, and you can do so. So, for example, the Budge's dictionary, when they're collecting, let's just flip over to that real quick so you can see. We're looking at this Budge's dictionary, and you see these references and so forth, like BD, meaning Book of the Dead, and this is where this term is found. And you see different references like that. They went from text, papyri, coffin text, pyramid text, text on stelae, text in tombs, text on, you know, vessels and so forth, cataloged all of them, put numbers for the catalogs of all these different texts from all these different, you know, sources, spanning from pre-dynastic times all the way through the end of the dynastic period. So you have a catalog of these various terms that is covering thousands of years. So if you see the term Ma'at and it's placed in the catalog, you can find everywhere the word Ma'at was mentioned for thousands of years. It was mentioned on this particular papyrus. The papyrus of Ani was mentioned in this line, in this chapter of the papyrus of Ani. It was mentioned in this line in the Papyrus of Hunefer. It was mentioned in this line in the Pyramid text of Unas. It was mentioned in this line in the coffin text of Seti and so forth. So that's an advantage that, you know, people living even at the time didn't have. Because if you're living at the time, thousands of years later that you haven't lived yet haven't happened. So you can get a catalog of various texts that govern thousands of years. And that's also why it's so very important with regard to the resiliency of the language. You look in a dictionary like this, and it catalogs texts spanning thousands of years, and they were still using the same words with the same meanings and the same deities from the early dynastic period all the way through thousands of years, and they're still using the same words, the same meanings, and the same deities and the same functions and so forth. And even into the Akan language, Yoruba language, Basa language, Fula language, even up until today, we're still using the same words and the same deities with the same names, with the same functions and so forth. The language is resilient. And even into the Hoodoo tradition, like the term mojo and jack and, you know, kanche and hoodoo and so forth, all of these terms are not only Akan terms from the Akan language, but they can be found in the language of ancient Kemet. So it's resilient, same language. So that's an advantage of, you know, having a text like that. So you can reference these things, and you don't have to have, in order to read the language, you don't have to have mastered every single word. When you have a reference, you can go back and find out what the reference is. You can cross-reference it, prove it, and then do the translation. And especially when we have, you know, Akan references as well, that brings it home. Now, so phonograms, described as those elements in nature used to represent a phoneme, syllable, or a whole word. The elements used to express the language of Kemet are well suited for this purpose, primarily because of their pictorial quality. This picture script has led some people to the false conclusion that it's picture writing, but it's actually phonetic as well as pictorial and so forth. So you have the object depicted, which is a picture, in picture writing, and that's all it is. But in our language, it's not only representing the picture, but also representing abstract ideas, sacred ideas, and so forth, a number of different things. For example, this little horned viper, it's a little snake with two horns, the horned viper. It not only represents the horned viper, but it also represents the letter F. So that sound that the horned viper makes, that symbol is the F sound. And if you look at it, this is one of those symbols that the Greeks stole from our language. Of course, every character in the English alphabet that came from, you know, Latin and Greek and so forth, which originally came from Phoenician, Kanani, which originally came from ancient Kemet. This is the F sound, the F sound. When you turn this symbol perpendicular, you will see that it is a long piece with two rods going forward. That is the F sound. That's the viper right side up. If you lay the F lowercase left down, that is the original long piece with the two little horns sticking out. That is the F sound. The viper still exists as the, in English, as it always was in ancient Kemet. It's just a simplified form of this viper. Now, it is the F sound because that's the sound that emanates from that entity naturally. So it's the F sound, but it also represents the third person masculine suffix pronoun he, him, or his, sometimes the neuter it or its. Only if it's accompanied by a short stroke, as you can see here, the little viper with the stroke up under it, only then does it represent a horned viper. If it doesn't have a little stroke, it represents the sound F, or he, him, his, and so forth, and sometimes it. So that's what a phonogram is. It's a symbol representing a sound or an idea and so forth. There are three types of those symbols. You have the monoliteral, the biliteral, and the triliteral. And of course, mono means one, bi means two, tri means three. So The monoliteral is a symbol that represents one letter. We just saw the viper, it's the F sound. That's the symbol, it represents the F. There are 25 monoliterals, and to render the individual phonograms of Kemet into English with comprehensible sounds, the appropriate International Phonetic Association symbols are used in this text. Linguists have developed the IPA alphabet system to, as far as possible, represent all of the consonantal sounds used in the various languages of man. So linguists around the world, they decided, okay, we're going to use these particular symbols that represent sounds. So when we're translating languages all around, the world, we have a standard set of symbols that represent sounds, and we can try to, compare. And the reason why that's important, for example, let's just jump ahead real quick because it's important. Or as a matter of fact, here. Well, we just, so here. This little circle is the placenta. Sometimes it's a siev, which is a strainer, but the placenta is the k sound. It could be k as well as ch. Just like in English, you have the ch, which can be k, like in chrome or chronology, but the ch can also be ch, as in check or change. This little placenta symbol, little dark circle, it can be the k sound or the ch sound. Then you have the F, which is the horned viper, the F, and then the loaf of bread, which is the T. Now, you see here, it has an H with the symbol under it. Now let's look at something. Back in the day when Egyptologists were first putting together languages, dictionaries and so forth, and this is one of those dictionaries. The k sound, a little, as you can see here, the placenta, the k sound. Back in the day, they used the KH to represent that. And the F, of course, with the, viper and the T. So that's the Kef, and they stuck the E in there just to facilitate pronunciation because they didn't know what the vowel was. But it's really the KH sound, which is the circle, the F, and the T. Later on, linguists decided that they're not going to use it that way. They all agreed that instead of using the KH for this symbol, they would use the H with the symbol under it, meaning the K or the Ch sound. So that's important because when you're looking at the Budge dictionary, there are certain conventions that they use that they were using 100 years ago that linguists decided they weren't going to use anymore. However, the Budge dictionary is important because they decided to, utilize the sounds based on how they actually sounded. Because if you looked at an H with a little symbol under the bottom, you wouldn't automatically assume that that was the K sound. Linguists know that, but the average person wouldn't know that. But when you're looking in the hieroglyphic dictionary, KH is a K sound or maybe a Ch sound. So it's very, intuitive, it's direct and focused. And so you need to know the differences. You have the Budge dictionary, which is popular. You have the Vigus dictionary that follows the more, recent linguistic approach, the Gardner dictionary and so forth. So you have different dictionaries that saying the same thing, but they use certain conventions that are slightly different. So you need to be aware of that. But just to go back down. So now we're getting into the reading of the language. So there are 25 monoliterals. A monoliteral, once again, is a symbol that represents one letter, monoliteral. There are 25 of them. And this is the brother Ankh Ra, by the way, who transitioned, who wrote this book. This is Anthony Browder, who's, he's written a number of books and so forth. They were in Cairo at the time. Now, phonograms of Kamit. This is the monoliteral sign list. There are 25 monoliterals. There are 25 symbols that represent one letter. This symbol, they'll say it's the African vulture. They used to say it was an eagle. Then they started saying, well, we think it's a vulture, but there's an African fish eagle that is indigenous to Kamit that represents that bird as well. We see that as that African fish eagle. So they've gone back and forth. They'll say it was the eagle or a vulture, and they're not sure, but that African fish eagle you'll see, and even the sound that the African fish eagle makes is representative. But that bird symbol with the flat head and so forth is the symbol. If you look at this, this is the cursive form of that. You'll see the bird is very detailed, and especially when you see it on a monument, you see the feathers drawn out and so forth, very detailed. But if you just did a cursive version, just kind of drew the body, just circular and so forth, and didn't go into any detail, it becomes this. This is the cursive version of the original MEDUT. That's the hieratic in use. We talk about Old Kamit language, Middle Kamit language, Late Kamit language. This is the hieratic. It was going back to Old Kamit. They had the formal version as well as the cursive version. Then in Late Kamit, by the time the Greeks get involved, that later demotic, that later cursive version, which is even more simplified. But it's the sound. You see that little eagle or quote unquote vulture, but the eagle, it's the sound. That's why he says the A as in the English father. The cursive version of the sound. And if you look at this, if you look closely, look at a lowercase a in English, that is the same symbol. It is the symbol. This is where English got the symbol from. Now you have the reed, the flowering reed. They decided that they're going to use the I for that symbol. And they also decided that this, the 3, looks like a 3, basically. They would use that for the symbol. They decided on that later on. Linguists decided on that. That's what they call the IPA. That's the set of symbols that linguists around the world agreed upon. So they said every time you see a bird, instead of writing the English letter A, they would just draw this symbol. They would write this symbol to translate it. They decided that they were going to use the I, the English I, to represent this. So if you're translating these words, if you see a bird in ancient Kemet, you're trying to translate it into the English script or translate it and, transliterate it, they started using the I. Flowering reed, they'll say E as in English, easy. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's the sound and sometimes it's the sound. And we have proof of that in the Akan language because every time that reed symbol shows up, it's either an or an typically, and we can prove that. But when you have 2 reeds, it's the E sound, as in the English term, the Y as in happy. That's why they use it as a Y. So you really have you have but then sometimes as well. This is E. Then you have the forearm with the open palm, the cursive version, late cursive word version, forearm and hand. They'll say ayin. When we look at it consistently, it's more like an on, but they'll say ion. So, but it's more like an on. Then you have the little chick that represents the U or the W, the oo sound. So that's translated as transliterated as W or U. They'll use either one to translate that one. The leg, and even you can see here, the cursive version of this bird is the same as the English U, and that's why it's transliterated as the U. You see this leg and the foot. The cursive version is that it is the B sound, foot and the calf. So it's the B sound. And if you look at the lowercase b, it is derived from this leg curling up into the form of a foot. That B sound, that is the B sound in ancient Kemet. That is the B sound in English. You have this footstool, as they will call it, the P sound. This is the cursive version, and then the late cursive version. That late cursive version, if you make it perpendicular, is the lowercase p, a version of the lowercase p, except they just close the top loop. It's the P sound. The viper, in the cursive version, the viper is standing kind of upright. So you see his two horns up here. Once again, it's the F sound. If you turn this symbol around, it is the F once again. It's the F sound, the F sound. You have the owl facing forward with his face turned facing forward. Typically all the glyphs, are facing, right or left and so forth, but the owl faces forward. If you look at his face, they just took the version of his face, made it sideways for the cursive version and so forth. That is the M sound, the sound. In the cursive version of Kemet, if you look at the face of the owl, and they just took that version and made it, it looks like a 3, of course, but it's, when you turn it sideways, it becomes the English M. When you see the owl, it's the sound. When you see the viper, it's the F sound. When you see the little footstool, it's the P sound, the P sound. When you see the calf and the foot, it's the B sound. When you see the owl, it's the sound. And you see the letter M, once again, stolen from our cursive version. It's just horizontal instead of perpendicular. Make this sign horizontal, it becomes the letter M. You have the wavy water line, ripple of water is the sound, the vibration. The wavy line, if you cut off most of this wave and just leave the first 2 ripples, it is the capital letter N. They use the lowercase n here, but the capital letter N is up, down, up. And when you look at the N sound, it's up, down, up, but they have 7 of them typically. But if you cut it off, the first up, down, and up, that is the letter N, and it's still N is the same picture, up, down, up, and it's the same sound. N, and even when you say N, the energy is going up through your nose and your mouth, nose and mouth, and it's going up, down, up, down. So when you say if you say and close your mouth, it becomes an but if you open your mouth, it becomes because it's going through the nose and the mouth. It's going up, down, up, down. The energy is going up, down, up, down, up, down in order to make that sound. That's why you have the symbol that's up, down, because that's what it represents. Okay. This is a symbol of an open mouth. If you just open your mouth, say that's the symbol of an open mouth. In order to make the sound you have to open your mouth like this. And that's why it's the symbol for the R sound, the or R sound. In the hieratic script, cursive script is written in this fashion. In the Demotic script, it's still a version of the open mouth, but this is the lowercase r, as you can see right here. You have a pole and then a curved version coming out of the pole. You have the pole and then a curved version coming out of the pole that represents the R. So once again, we're still using the same sounds. You have one of the versions of H, the H sound. You have the cursive version, and then you have the Demotic cursive version, and of course the lowercase h in English. If you flip around the cursive version, the Demotic version of the H, this is where it's derived from. H, the H sound, as in home in English, the aspirated H, the H sound. This twisted flats is another H in the cursive version. These 3, loops and so forth are just kind of written in a zigzag fashion. And then in the demotic form, once again, it looks like the H of today. It's an emphatic H. In English, there is no emphatic H. But in Afro-Akani languages, there's an emphatic H. So you have the ha sound, which is the regular H, ha. But then you have the het, which English doesn't have, and many European languages doesn't have. So we had to have a separate symbol for the emphatic H, the het. In Akan, that becomes like the HY, the het, as well as the KY, het, and so forth. Now we get to this symbol. So you have two H's, the regular H, the ha sound, the H with the dot under it, which is the het. Then they took the H with the, curve under it for the placenta, which we just talked about. And that's the ka or the cha sound, just like the CH in English can be ka or cha. It's the placenta. And as we saw earlier in the Budge dictionary, they just wrote it out KH. Instead of writing an H with a half circle under it, they just wrote KH because it makes more sense. But the linguists later on decided they weren't going to use the KH. They're just going to use an H with a curved line under it, which is less intuitive. It makes more sense to use the KH, but they decided that. And you need to know that because when you're looking at texts that are being translated, you're going to see an H, it's the ha sound. If it's the H with the dot under it, it's the het. If it's the H with the curved line under it, it's the ka or cha. Then you have another one, the H with the line under it. It can also be the ka or cha. It's an animal's belly with teats and so forth. And even here, you see the long pole with the curved line. If you make that perpendicular and turn it around, it is a symbol of letter H. So it can be ka or cha and so forth. You have this Dora bolt, which is the S sound. It can also be the Z sound, but the sa or za. In the hieratic version, the cursive version, it's still the straight line, but instead of using two circles, they just put two strokes because they're doing it cursive, doing it fast and so forth. And then in the demotic cursive, they just do one little quick stroke and so forth. But if you turn this up, right side up, and if you did it quickly, you have those two strokes in the middle. And you remove the top bolt. This is where the S symbol comes from. So you have the S, sa, the Dora bolt, as in the English C. That's the horizontal S, the Dora bolt. But then you have the folded cloth, which is the vertical S. They have two versions of the S sound. Then you have the pool of water, which is the sh sound. So we have different symbols. Just like in English, you would put SH together. In Kamit, they just put that pool of water, and that's the sh sound, because a pool of water makes the sh sound when the water is in the pool. So you have sh, the sh sound. You have this hill or a slope, a rounded slope, like a sand dune or a hill, a slope and so forth. That is the ka sound. The Q sound without the U, like for example, the word opaque, O-P-A-Q-U-E, but it's not like queen, qua, it's opaque, it's a ka sound. And the reason why they do that, if you look at the the cursive variant, it's the same little slope, but they have an extra line there. That is the capital Q in English, if you look at it. But it's the ka sound. The reason why they do that is because there were different ka sounds in Kamit. The slope represented the ka sound. You have this little basket with the lip on it, lip or handle on it. Cursive is here, that's the K sound. If you turn the K this way, you have the straight bottom, and then the piece on top is just that the basket is not covered, but the basket is the ka sound. Then you have the standard for a jar. It's the ga sound or the G sound and so forth, as in English go. You have the little loaf of bread, like a loaf of bread sitting on a curved loaf of bread sitting on a table and so forth. That is the T sound, the T. And this is one of those sounds, when you look at the various, and we're going to get into this, when you look at the way the symbols are structured, if you say at, when you say ah, you have to put your tongue at the roof of the mouth in order to stop the air from coming in the sound. So if you say at and you say ah, you have to stop it. So the tongue is flat, it's touching the roof of the mouth. So if you look from the inside, the air coming up from the trachea, it goes into the roof of the mouth. You have the roof of the mouth, and then the tongue touching the, the roof. So you have the roof, you have the tongue here, you have the roof of the mouth. And when you say ah, the air takes the form of the roof of the mouth and the flat tongue touching the roof and so forth. So the air, when you say ah and you cut it off, the air takes the form of a semicircle. It takes this form in order to say T or at or ah. It has to take that form. The air takes that form inside of the mouth. The roof of the mouth, the flat tongue, and the air coming up from the trachea, it takes the form of this glyph in order to make that sound. What's important is the life force energy in the air also takes that form, and now you have a radiant force inside your mouth in the form of a MEDUT of a hieroglyph. And when you look at the various glyphs and the sounds, you'll see that they come from the natural sound that emanates from an animal. For example, when we see the term ro, which is the term for lion, that is the natural sound that emanates from that entity. And because ra, as in roar, ra, comes from that animal, then that is the word for lion. It is ra because that's the natural sound emanating spiritually and physically from the animal. Meow, you'll see in Kamit, M-A-U, is the term for cat. Why? Because the natural collection of sound vibrations that emanates from that entity is meow. So they call the cat a meow. Same thing in Akan, one of the words for cat is meow. So you'll have that, but you also have the, when the sounds manifest, the way the life force energy takes shape in the mouth and in the body, that represents the glyph itself. You have this tethered rope. That is the ch sound. It can be a t sound, but it can also be a ch sound, but it can also be a k sound. If you look at English, the ch can be cuz, we say it like chrome, chronology. It can be ch, as in check or change, but ch can also be the shet, as in Charlotte, or chagrin, or charlatan, and so forth. So 3 different versions for the ch combo. You have this tethered rope, which can be the k sound, just like the ch combo in chronology, but it can also be the ch sound as well. You have the hand with the open palm. That is the D sound, the D sound. And then when you look at the cursive variant, you'll see if this closed up, that would be a capital letter D horizontal. If you made it perpendicular, that would be a capital D. And then you have the reared snake, the reared viper, kind of standing up and so forth. That is the J sound, like DJ, J as in judge. But if you look at the, if you made this perpendicular, that is the letter J sound, that's the J sound and so forth. Then you have late forms. We said the little chick is the U or the W. In the later periods, this coiled rope also represented the U or the W. In the late period, this lasso, the rope with the loop and so forth, is the O sound or the UW, wah, which became the O sound. In late forms, the lion laying on his stomach, the couchant lion, is the R sound, the R sound. In foreign words, because ancient Kemet, we did not have a L, we had a rolling R, the R. When foreign words entered, like Cleopatra, her name is spelled with an L and so forth. We translated that with the symbol for the rolling R, the Ra. So it would be, we would pronounce it Cleopatra. They say Cleopatra. Greeks would say that. If we saw that, we didn't use the letter L in Kemet, so we would say Cleopatra and so forth. Just like in Akan, there's no letter L in Akan. There's a rolling R. So if there's a foreign word that has a letter L, like mulatto, the Akan pronounce it as murato, muratoni. Instead of saying mulatto, there's no letter L in Akan, we say murato. The rolling R is used for the L. Same thing in ancient Kemet. We had an R, whether it's the open mouth or the lion laying on the stomach. That's the R sound. When foreign words enter the language later, and they tried to translate their names or their words that had L's in them, they had to use the glyph for the lion or the open mouth, the R, because there is no glyph for the letter L because we didn't have that letter. The red crown is also the N sound. Normally the wavy waterline is the N sound, but in late period, in later forms, the red crown itself became the N sound as well. Additionally, you had this open, really an open mouth from the side view. In reality, the sound. We had the M, the owl is the sound, but we also have this. And then we also have this symbol for the G, and then the symbol for the ch sound as well. So just like you have 26 monoliterals in reality for the English alphabet, you have 25 monoliterals in Kemet. This page, you have to commit these to memory because, you know, they're all throughout the language, of course. They're the foundation of the language and so forth. You have to commit these to memory. You have to memorize these 25 monoliterals. So anytime you see them, whenever you see that owl, you know it's a Anytime you see the wavy waterline, you know it's the When you see the foot in the calf, you know it's the buh. When you see the little chick, you know it's the oo, whether it's U or W, woo, and so forth. You need to memorize those monoliterals. He gives an observation. A few of the symbols, those monoliterals, not only do they represent a sound like ah or ka or ba, but a few of them represent a whole word. Most of them don't, but a few of them represent a whole word. The reed, which, you know, reeds growing up out the ground and so forth. The ah, even though they write it as an I, but it's the ah, sometimes eh. It literally means I or me or my. Just like in English, I, that is the reed. The I or eh, it means I, me, or my. So it's not only the sound for eh, but the word eh. And of course, in English, that becomes I. It started off as eh, meaning I, myself, me or my. And in English, it became I. Same word, same meaning. Just one stroke up, meaning I am this, I am that. That little stroke in English, the English alphabet for I, was stolen from this one tall symbol, meaning I, me, or mine. The ka sound, the little basket with the lip, is the ka sound. It's the second person singular, meaning you, your, or yours. The tethered rope, the cha sound, and it can also be the ka sound. Second person singular, and this is the masculine, then there's feminine, you, your, or yours. So in our ancestral language, we have, just like you have masculine and feminine, like he and hers, his and hers, or he or she, and so forth. Even for you and yours in ancestral languages, there's a feminine you and a masculine you. A feminine yours and a masculine yours. It's a balance of male and female. The masculine you or yours is ka. The feminine is cha. But there's also cha can also be ka. The owl, the is the sound, but the also means by means of or with, from or out of. So it can mean that as well. The N sound, N, which is simply the sound N, in. It can also mean to or for, and to direction only to persons. And you also find two N's together as N or Nin. It means negative or no or not. And that's the same as non or none or un in English. Undone is to undo something, no longer do it. No or negative or non or none and so forth comes from the n, and we'll see that that means no or negative as well. And then you have the R sound, which means to or into or towards. That's because the open mouth means going inside. You put food in your mouth, it goes into the system, it goes into a deep well and goes into another world once the food enters into your system and so forth. So the mouth is the gateway. So not only is the sound as a monoliteral, but it also represents to, into, or towards in respect of. So those are the monoliterals. Have to memorize the monoliterals. Then you have biliterals. So you have monoliterals. Remember, there were three kinds of phonograms: monoliterals, biliterals, triliterals. Monoliterals is one symbol representing a sound. Biliterals are those phonograms that represent two consonantal signs, not just one, but two. The language contains approximately 120 of these. So there are 25 monoliterals. It's about 121 of these biliterals. This is an example of, this is a symbol of a heart. The word ab is the word for heart in Kamit. And he just talks a little bit about the heart symbol, but ah and b, ab, meaning heart. That's an example of a biliteral. So if you look at the biliteral sign list, there are 121 of them. And just like we looked at the monoliteral list, when you look at in the book, you see that there's a biliteral. So for example, this lasso, so lasso is a rope bent over and then a loop at the bottom, a lasso. It's the W, ooh, and remember this little 3, it looks like a 3, but it's really the A sound. Let's go back up just to show that. Remember that they decided that the A sound will be represented by what looks like a 3. They decided to use that symbol. So when you look at the lasso, it's a W-A, ooh, and ah, wah, wah. In the IPA symbols, they say W, and instead of writing an A, wah, they put that little backwards 3 that represents the A, but that's the sound. It's two sounds, W and A, wah, wah. The little jabiru bird, the so-called wood ibis, or the wood hobby bird, that is the ba bird. It's the ba sound and the ah sound, biliterals, two different sounds together. Not just one sound, but two sounds. The ba and the ah becomes ba. So when you see this bird, that is the ba bird. It represents ba. You see the pintail duck with the outstretched wings very often. It's the pa and the ah together. It's pa. When you see the ma'ah, the sickle, the little sickle, which is an agricultural tool, you know, cutting wheat and so forth, harvesting wheat, you use that sickle, originally a jawbone of an animal and so forth, and the teeth are still there, so you can cut with that. That sickle is the and the ah, and that becomes ma. So when you look at these 121 biliterals, that's what it is. There are 121 biliterals, there are 25 monoliterals. 121 biliterals. Another version, the two arms with the two hands going up, the ka and the a becomes ka. That is the ka symbol, that is a symbol for the soul, the divine consciousness, the deity in the head region, ka. So when you go through these symbols, these are just things you're going to have to memorize these symbols. We don't have to go through all 121. What it's all it's simply showing is there are two symbols together that make biliteral, two symbols that make up the sound, make up the sound. So, but for example, let's give an excursion to give further, insight into when we engage in ancestral religious practice. We have greater insight into the language. We can look at a symbol like Ma'a, the sickle. Let's look at that real quick. I'm gonna go to Budge's dictionary. Oh, no, this one. Okay. So this is an example of, and we're going to get into more detail about this. Many people have heard the name Ma'at or the word Ma'at. In general, the word Ma'at means divine law and balance as a noun, but the female divinity, the divine force of divine law and balance, her name is Ma'at. So they'll show her sitting here. She has the feather on her head. She's holding an ankh in this determinative symbol. You see the sickle, Ma'a, M-A, we just saw the biliteral, the sickle, Ma. But then you also have the forearm with the open palm. So you have Ma, A, and then you have the loaf of bread, which is the T. So you have Ma, A, T, the biliteral, the monoliteral, and then another monoliteral. You have the Ma sound, the next A, the A, and then the T, Ma'at. Sometimes people say Mayat or Mayat, but it's Ma'at, Ma'at. Sometimes they use the sickle to represent that. Sometimes the biliteral is the plinth. And you see that plinth that they stand on or they set their throne on it. It represents a foundation and elevation of earth, a strong foundation. Just like you lay a foundation first before you build a house so it won't sink into the soil and so forth. That plinth represents a strong foundation. So you will see the deities standing upon that foundation, or you see they set their throne. They have a foundation, then they set their throne on that foundation, and then they sit on the throne. That's why it says uprightness, truth, right, righteousness, law, order, integrity, straightness, uprightness, and so forth. Highest conception of physical and moral law known to the Egyptians. Ma'at, the female divinity. So she's the divine force, the feminine aspect of divine law and balance, that force in creation. Now, when you deal with ancestral religion and you recognize and you engage the ritual process, and we still worship these divinities, worship or word shipping or shipping our words, shipping our sound vibrations, shipping our ritual invocations, shipping or sending our words, word shipping, ritual invocations to project that energy, to provoke the energy of the divinity. Just like a child, when the child cries out, that's a ritual invocation. The baby cries out, those sound vibrations hit the ear of the mother and so forth. That's a cry, it provokes her to respond. And then she releases the milk to feed the child through breastfeeding and so forth. So that's a ritual invocation. He's word shipping or shipping his words, shipping his sound vibrations, shipping his energy to provoke the energy of the mother so she can respond by dispensing that which nourishes the child. When we engage in ritual invocation, When we speak ritual sound vibrations through ritual prayer, ritual song, ritual chant, those sound vibrations are projected to these forces in creation, a male divinity, female divinity. That spirit will respond. When you push that spirit, provoke that spirit, project that energy, then it stimulates them to respond and dispense or release their energy to replenish your shrines within their body so you can align with them spiritually. Spirit possession can take place. They get inside the body of the person, operate through the body, heal, teach, guide, and so forth. That is ritual invocation. So Ma'at is a female divinity. She operates in creation. She communicates, she possesses, she speaks through divination. She is an abosom, which is the Akan term for deity. She is an Orisha. She's a Vodou. She's an Ntoro, a divinity, force in creation. That force that regulates divine balance in creation. Now, when you engage the ritual process and you invoke this divinity, she's the feminine force of divine law and balance, that contractive force of divine law and balance. But then you have the male force of divine law and balance. So if somebody's looking at this dictionary, and if they simply scrolled up, they will see Ma'a, the god of law, order, truth, integrity, and so forth. Ma'a is the male divinity of divine law and balance. Ma'at is the female divinity of divine law and balance, the expansive and contractive poles of divine law. Law is the expansive pole of divine order. So through law, divine order is expressed. So these are male and female forces that regulate order in creation. That includes gravity, that includes making sure that the organs and systems and so forth are constantly in a symbiotic relationship. The planets are not crashing into each other because they are forces of divine law and balance that keep things harmoniously moving in creation. Even on a mundane level, if you take a penny and a bowling ball and you hold them up at the same height and release them at the same time, they will hit the ground at the same time. They are different externally with regard to size and volume and so forth, but the law equilibrates them. The forces in creation that regulate divine law and balance, inclusive of gravity and so forth, equilibrate these two. When you adhere to the law, you are equilibrated. So, for example, we don't have to seek, and this directly informs our approach to nation building and restoration. We deal with nationism, amaniye, the purification of nationalism. We're Afurakani nationists. That means we approach nation building, restoration rooted in our ancestral religious values. So we don't seek unity. When people say, well, we need to unify, and the most important thing is we need unity, 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 or else we're not going to be. In reality, when you deal with nationism, not secular nationalism, or a nationalism rooted in pseudo-fake religions like Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hebrewism, with these fictional cartoon characters who never existed, like Jesus and Moses and Muhammad and Abraham, and Isaac and Ishmael, and Muhammad and Allah and Yahweh. These fictional cartoon characters were all fraudulent. They didn't exist as black, white, or in any other form. Instead of trying to tie your nationalism to fake pseudo-religions or trying to blacken up pseudo-religions and fictional cartoon characters, or tying your nationalism in an imitation of white Europeans and making it a secular nationalism, we deal with nationism, the purification of nationalism. We have our nationism conference every year, our Odwirafo Fashe, around the summer solstice in June, where we deal with 7 principal values of nation building and so forth. And we have some books on that. But we're talking about nation building rooted in our ancestral religious values. That means that we don't seek unity. We adhere to Ma'a and Ma'at, the forces of divine law and balance. When we adhere to Ma'a and Ma'at, the forces that regulate balance in creation, when we align our thoughts, intentions, and actions with these male and female forces that are constantly regulating order within our bodies, within Earth, within the cosmos and so forth, and even within our communal sphere, within our activities, when we align our thoughts, intentions, and actions spiritually, ritually, with the forces that regulate order, we balance our thoughts, intentions, and actions. We balance our physical bodies, our spirit bodies, and we can engage in the kind of behavior and communication and working together that promotes nation building. When we adhere to these forces of nature, we achieve unity instantaneously. When the penny and the bowling ball are dropped at the same time, the law of equilibration, the forces of Ma'at equilibrates them instantly. They don't have to seek unity with one another. They just need to align with Ma'at, the forces of divine law and balance, and unity is instantaneous. So we don't chase unity, we chase or align ourselves with Ma'at, and unity is instantaneous. So, and that informs the way we approach rearing children, establishing institutions, defending ourselves, not only with metal armaments, but also utilizing hoodoo root work for chemical and biological warfare to wage against our enemies and so forth. We get into detail about that, every aspect of life. So, but you have individuals who've been teaching about Kemet and talking about Kemet and talking about Ma'at and so forth and the principles and so forth. But if you're not engaged in authentic ritual practice, then you don't really know that Ma'at is a divinity that communicates, that possesses, that directs us and so forth. You're not aware of that. And then secondly, you're not aware of the male divinity Maa that regulates divine law and balance as well. Maa and Ma'at are two halves of the divine whole. They are the two forces, expansive and contractive, that regulate law in creation. Without Ma'a and Ma'at, nothing can take place in creation. Ma'a and Ma'at are, for example, Ma'a, he's one half of the divine law that regulates all of creation. Ma'at is one half of the divine law that regulates all of creation. If you think about male emotional instability, and you look at the behavioral expressions of certain male, Afurakani males, African Black males and so forth, and you see emotional instability or mental instability or behavioral instability and so forth, lack of discipline and so forth, the very force in creation that regulates law and balance, if you don't regularly invoke that male force, that divinity, then you can't align with, you can't express balanced behavior when the very force of divine law and balance you don't even know exists. Because Europeans don't focus on Ma'a, and since we typically imitate Europeans, we decided not to focus on this divinity. When you look at the, this is the Budge Dictionary, when it says P400, M571, N1178, these are the pyramid texts. These are the references where you can find the divinity. The pyramid text of Pepi, 400th utterance, the pyramid text of Mer in Ra, utterance 571, the pyramid text of Nefer Kara, Pepi II, utterance 1178, the pyramid text of Unas, utterance 220, you'll find the divinity Ma'a mentioned. You have individuals who have been misinforming our people for literally decades, allowing people to call them grandmasters and all kinds of nonsense and all kinds of titles, who've been talking about Kemet or going back and forth to Kemet for years and teaching the language and so forth, but because they are operating from a Eurocentric perspective, even though promoting an African-centered perspective and so forth, they're unaware of the divinity because they're not engaged in authentic ritual practice. So therefore, they not only have they never heard of Ma'a, because they didn't simply scroll up in this dictionary and find the divinity. Now, of course, when you practice tradition, including their expressions in Akan and Yoruba and Vodou and so forth, he exists in every tradition. He's one of the major divinities. Without him, nothing is happening. So when you engage the ritual process and you invoke Ma'at, for example, when you're in tune, she's not going to allow you to continue to pour libation unless you include Ma'at. He's not going to allow you to continue engage in ritual practice unless you include him. He's going to force you to stop what you're doing and include him when you're authentically practicing. So we've actually had individuals who would try to say that Ma'a didn't exist and there is no male divinity, it's just Ma'a. Because they never heard of him, then they would try to say he didn't exist or that people made him up. But when you look at the actual text, simply here, and you also see Duat 11. That is the 11th hour of the Duat in the text of Ancient Kemet. So let's look at the 11th hour of the Duat real quick. This is the text, 11th division of the Duat. When you see the different divinities in the 11th division, you see Af Kanef, Nerta, Kenem Renit. You see Aptawi, Mer in Awef, A in Awef, Reset Afu. And the text is actually long. They had to break it up into 3 rows, but the text is actually stretched out. So all of these are lined up. So Reset Afu right here is actually, you can see this little sedge plant here. He's actually standing behind this divinity here. So you see the little sedge plant here. Reset Afu is really standing here. Then you see his name right here, spelled here. That's where this text left off right here. He's actually standing here. So Reset Afu, the little sedge plant here. Then you see this divinity with the star and the falcon, which is Dwa Heru. And next to Dwa Heru is the sickle and the arm with the open palm. It's the biliteral Ma and then A, Ma'a, the male divinity Ma'a. Then in front of him is Mesketi and then the male divinity Hepa. That's from the tomb of Seti. In Budge's book, they simply recreated that image. That tomb is a little damaged, but they recreated that image from the 11th hour of the Duat. Now, if we look at a different text, you saw Reset Afu, and it's the little symbol for Reset, the southern plant. Reset means south. Reset Afu is a southern plant. You see that Reset Afu, and his body is really right here. After Reset Afu is Dwa Heru, and then Ma'a. If we go to the papyrus that they call Zagreb, the book of the Amduat, we're going to look in the 11th hour of this other papyrus, because when you look at the 11th hour of the Duat, you're going to find the same text across the board, all across Kemet over thousands of years. So if you look at the 11th hour of the Duat, that same scene is not as ornate from the tomb of Seti, but you still have the same deities. You see the little rounded plant of the south, the Reset. This is the deity. They, in the Zagreb papyrus, is not as ornate. They drew stick figures. In the tomb of the Ensu Seti, they drew, full figures, and it's very ornate and very well drawn. In this particular, and that's in a tomb. This is a papyrus, and they have stick figures, but they have the same divinities. You have the little sedge plant, which is Reset Afu, and that's him. After Reset Afu, you have the star and the falcon, which is Dwa Heru, and that's him standing there. If we go back real quick, this is Reset Afu, the little sedge plant. And that's the little sedge plant here. Then the next deity in front of him is Dwa Heru, the star and the falcon. And then after Dwa Heru, the star and the falcon, you should see the deity Ma'a. And when you look in the Zagreb papyrus, you have Reset Afu, the little plant. That's the deity. The next deity is the star and the falcon, Dwa Heru, and he's standing right here, and his name is written next to him. And once again, you have the deity here, the sickle, the plinth, Ma'a, that's Ma'a, the sickle and the plinth, that's the male divinity Ma'a. So you have the male divinity Ma'a in the tomb of Seti, in the 11th hour of the Duat, the male divinity Ma'a in the papyrus, the Zagreb papyrus. When you look at the so-called Book of Coming Forth by Day of the Book of the Dead, we are aware of the balancing of the heart against the feather. That is the judgment scene where the heart is balanced against the feather. And if your heart is light because it's not weighed down by disorder and anxiety and lust and so forth, you have a light heart. Your heart is on the scale of Ma'at, balanced by the feather and it's light. And then you pass that test in the dual hall of Ma'at. Your heart is balanced against the feather of Ma'at. If you pass that test, then you can move forward. Let's look at this real quick. As a matter of fact, this is a portion of the text from the dual hall of Ma'at. When you go before 42, this is some of those 42 deities. And in fact, well, we won't go into that right now. But in this particular text, this is half of the text and there's another half. But when you look at the entire length of the papyrus, there are 42 divinities. And we'll go into some of this next week as we're going through some of these texts, but it's not 42 laws of Ma'at. There are 42 deities that we must invoke, that we ritually invoke, that we go before. So for example, if you go into the home of somebody who practices the Yoruba tradition, and you'll see a shrine for Eshu at the front door, and the Ajogun, the warriors and so forth, Ogun and Oshosi and so forth. And you see that shrine for those Orisha, and you salute them. Then you go further into the house, and if that person is an Olorisha, if they're a priest of Obatala, they'll have a shrine for Obatala, then you go to that deity shrine and you go and salute that divinity. If they have a shrine for an Ojubo, a shrine for their Egungun and so forth, their ancestral spirits, then you go salute that shrine and salute those spirits. And then after you do that, then you sit down and have a conversation and talk and do what you're doing. You come to the home of a person who practices Akan tradition, you come into our home, you see the shrine for the Abosom, you salute the shrine, you see the shrine, the deities, you see the shrine for the Nananom and Samampo, you salute that shrine, you see another shrine and so forth. And after you salute these different shrines of different deities, then you sit down and have a conversation and do whatever you plan to do. We do that on a regular basis. We pour libation and invoke these different divinities through ritual practice, or we play drums and the divinities become invoked and they possess and come into the bodies of the persons and so forth. We're invoking different divinities. They show up, whether through spirit possession or spirit communication through divination. They communicate with us, guide us, and so forth. We invoke them one by one. We do that throughout the course of our lives, going into people's homes, going to shrines, engage in ritual, and so forth. When we transition, we do the exact same thing that we've always done. We invoke these 42 major divinities. The invocation, you invoke them by name, and then you say, I have not violated that aspect of creation that you govern. So for example, the reason in this particular book that we wrote, this is one of our books, Kokobo. We have 4 different articles in this book, and we were talking about the divine prohibition against dissexuality, homosexuality, and Kemet. When you look at the 42 enunciations of Ma'at, one of them is a divine prohibition against dissexuality, homosexuality. And this particular divinity, when you get to this deity right here, he's one of the divinities here in the text. When you get to that divinity, it's A-Kererti Per-Im Amentet An-Nuk-Nuk, which means hail Kererti, meaning hey Kererti, the divinity's name is Kererti, you invoke that divinity. Just like when you were on earth and you went to the shrine of the divinity and you invoke that divinity to communicate with him and his spirit came forth. When you transition, you do the same thing, you invoke that divinity. A-Kererti is the ritual invocation. You project your energy to provoke that divinity, to get that divinity's attention, and they come forth. Then you say, A-Kererti Per-Im Amentet, the one who comes forth from Amentet. Then you say, An-Nuk-Nuk. An-Nuk-Nuk means I have not copulated with a copulator, and you see the erect phallus with seminal fluid emerging. I have not engaged in same-sex or dissexual, the perversity of dissexual activity. Kererti is the one who governs the caverns and so forth, the sacred gateways to the spirit realm and everything else. So you invoke the divinity that governs the caverns, who comes forth from the spirit world. You say, I have not violated that aspect of creation that you govern. I have not violated the caverns. I have not violated the kerer, the caverns that you govern. The only caverns that I've entered into, the sacred portals that I entered into, are those that I'm supposed to enter into, whether it's ritually or through copulation with someone of the opposite sex, of course, an Afro-Kaiti woman, of course. No crackers, no Asians, none of that nonsense, no white Hispanics and all that. So, but first you invoke the divinity. That's the ritual. That's the expansive aspect of the ritual. Then you say, I have not violated that aspect of creation that you govern. And when you state that ritually, then the spirit searches out your spirit to make sure that you haven't violated that. But you have to state that first. So it's an expansion and a contraction. You invoke the divinity and let the divinity search your spirit to make sure you lived in harmony with that divinity. Then you go to the next divinity. And you go to 42 different divinities and invoke them one by one. Just like when you would come in somebody's house, you go to one Orisha or Abosom, invoke them, go to the next one, invoke them, go to the next one. Because if you were out of order, if you just robbed somebody and then you come to somebody's house and salute Eshu, something's going to happen to you because you were just violating divine order. So you're not just going to walk in front of a shrine after you engage in disorder and try to pretend like everything's fine. He's going to make something happen to you physically or spiritually or whatever. So we do the same thing afterward when we transition that we did during life. We invoke the divinity, let the spirit search us out, then we go to the next one, and after we go through these 42 divinities, it's a sacred grouping of divinities that govern all aspects of creation. Then we're allowed to have our heart being weighed against the feather, and we can move on to a certain aspect of, the spirit realm. That's not just stating 42 laws and saying, I have not done this and I have not done that. If you're not invoking 42 different deities, having your spirit searched out by these 42 different deities and moving from divinity to divinity, then you're not engaged in that ritual process. Just reading a text and reciting something, that's what Europeans are doing. The text clearly shows you every single divinity, the name of every single divinity, what aspect of creation they govern. The people of ancient Kemet already knew this because they were doing it every day. So they didn't have to read the text. They were putting these texts out for posterity and just to educate their own community and so forth. But they were already engaged in that process. Just like some Akan people or Yoruba people and so forth, they don't have text written out in Yoruba where they're talking about the Orisha per se, except recently. They know who Obatala is, they know who Ogun is, they know who Oshun is, they go to their shrines, they invoke them, give them offerings, get possessed, and so forth. We do the same thing with the Abosom and the Akan tradition, which is also the Hoodoo tradition in North America. We know who these Abosom are, these deities are. We invoke them, they possess, they communicate, they come through divination, they heal, they give directives and so forth. We do that on a regular basis. So when we're engaged in authentic ritual practice, this is what is actually happening. We're invoking 42 male and female divinities. We're not just reading a list. So that's the difference when you have ritual practice. You can understand what this text is saying because we do this on a regular basis. Moreover, after your heart is weighed against the feather of Ma'at, and you pass that test, one of the most extensive, longest texts in the entire Pert Imheru, Runu Pert Imheru, is an extensive interrogatory with the male deity Maa. You have to go through an interrogation. He interrogates you. You have to answer those questions in detail. When you answer those questions in detail, then he will ferret you past that test. Then he will ferry you across the sacred waters so you can get to the island where the pristine community of the Sekhet-Hetep, the divine fields of peace and offerings and so forth, is, and where the ancestresses and ancestors who are spiritually cultivated, the Akutu, dwell. First, you have to pass the test with Ma'at, the balancing of the heart against the feather, moving through the ritual invocations of 42 different deities. Once you pass that test with Ma'at, then you have to go through the extensive interrogatory with the male deity Maa. It's one of the longest texts in the entire Book of Coming Forth by Day, misnomer Book of the Dead. It's been there the entire time. People talk about the weighing of the heart against the feather, but they don't talk about the interrogatory with the male deity Maa, which is one of the longest books in chapters in the entire Book of Coming Forth by Day. When we're not engaged in authentic ritual practice, we don't even know that exists, but it's been there the entire time. Now, one more piece with regard to that. If you look in the, as we showed earlier, you have Ma'at. In the same dictionary, you have the divinity Maa. She's Ma'a Ria in Akan, and he's Ma Su in Akan. Ma Ria is talking about the solar boat, or Ria is the sun, and you see Ma'at in the solar boat in Kamit, the boat of sunrise. So Ma Ria is Ama Ria in Akan. She's Ma'a in the Oriya boat, the solar boat. Then you have Oma Su. Su means water and so forth. That's the boat of the sunset and so forth, crossing the river that goes into the gateway to the underworld and so forth. And you have, that's Ma'a in the Akan tradition. You have both of those divinities. Now, in Kamit there, side by side, of course, we have it. U220 is the pyramid text of Unas, utterance 220. The pyramid text of Pepi, P is abbreviation for Pepi, utterance 400. Mer in Ra, the pyramid text of Mer in Ra, the king Mer in Ra, 571. Nefer Ka-Ra, Pepi II, utterance 1178. In these pyramid texts, this is where you'll find these different entries for the divinity Ma'a. So let's look, for example, in Mer in Ra 571 and Nefer Ka-Ra 1178. Remember, the pyramid texts are the earliest religious compositions yet unearthed in the world. So this is the text of Pepi. Here's the text of Mer in Ra. And 571. And if you go back up once again, and these are the things we have to do to get to the bottom, the real information regarding culture. You have Mer in Ra, abbreviated as M, 571, and Nefer Ka-Ra, Pepi II, 1178. So if that's the reference, you have to check to see if it's actually there. Just because Bud said it exists, doesn't mean it's there. So we got to check to see if that text is there. We look for the pyramid text, find the utterance. Let's see if Ma'a is in there. And just like we can cross-reference with, the Akan language, if kes is really kasa, meaning to chatter foolishly and so forth, and we can find all the words and definitions in Akan, we can find these same deities with their same functions. Here's the pyramid text of Mer in Ra, 571. And what you will find is, well, look there first. And then this is pyramid text Pepi Nefer Ka-Ra. When it said in 1178, this is 1178, that utterance. And this is in Nefer Ka-Ra. You see Pepi, Nefer Ka-Ra, and so forth. We looked at what Allen, how he translated it, how Budge translated it and so forth, and then we showed the direct translations. And we're gonna get into it a little bit later in detail, but the text says, "Hail, ferryman, thou boatman of Ma'at, who does transport souls to Sekhet Aru, the divine field of reeds. This Pepi is true before heaven and earth, before heaven. He's true before earth. This Pepi is true before the island of earth. Pepi swam and arrived at that which is between the thighs of Nut." So it says, "Hail the ferryman." There's a deity who's a divine ferryman. He's in the boat, the ferry boat. Ferry boats carry you across the water. You pay the ferryman, you get in his boat, and then he carries you across the water. But that's a deity in Akan tradition. In Greek, when they say Chiron, Chiron, is the divine ferryman who carries you across the river, that takes you to the underworld and so forth after you pay him his money. That was stolen from the divine ferryman in ancient Kamit. In Akan culture, there's a divine ferryman, which is a divinity that carries you across the waters to get you to the land of Asamando, the land of the ancestresses and ancestors, if you lived in harmony with divine order. That's the same ferryman, the divinity, the ferryman, and that ferryman is called the boatman of Ma'at. He is in the Ma'at boat. He's the boatman of Ma'at. He transports souls to the Sekhet Aru, the divine field of reeds. This Pepi had died, the king Pepi Neferkara, he had died. They're saying that Pepi, he deserves to be transported to the divine field where the ancestresses and ancestors are living in peace, because he was true before heaven, he was true before earth, he's true before the island of earth, he lived in harmony with order, so he's asking the divine ferryman, can you ferry me across? Because if he lived out of harmony with order, he would not be allowed to dwell with the ancestral community that lives in harmony with order. He'll be an earthbound spirit, just like some of our people who get murdered, or they, died, got shot down by a stop sign and their blood soaked the earth right there. The spirit is still hanging around that stop sign, hanging around the house where they got stabbed. And somebody who's clairvoyant can see that spirit walking around in the house. If we don't help assist them to go to the ancestral realm, they'll hang out for 100 years or more. So, but if you live out of harmony with order, you're not going to be allowed, whether somebody tried to help you or not, because you put yourself in that position. You're going to be repelled from the pristine ancestral community because you created disorder on earth and you still have a discordant spirit. You're not going to be allowed to dwell in the community of the pristine ancestral spirits. Just like if you were robbing everybody in your family for drugs or something, and then they had a family reunion, you tried to walk up in the house, you're not getting in the house. You're going to be repelled. If you're not chased away, you're not getting in the house because of what you did to everybody in the family. When you transition, if you were living a life of disorder, your spirit will be repelled from the pristine ancestral community because you live out of harmony with order. But if you can show that you lived a life of divine order, the divine ferryman, after he searches you out, he will ferry you across the river to get to the other side. He's the boatman of Ma'at. So Pepi, the king, is saying, listen, I live in harmony with order. I can prove that. You can search my spirit out. I deserve to be ferried across the water. And he swam and he arrived and he jumped into those sacred waters and he swam across, and once the ferryman took him and so forth. Now, we give the actual translation. Chawi, the ferryman of the truth, the Egyptian Karan, that's where they stole it from. Mchent is the ferry boat. So Chawi is right here. That is the title of the ferryman. Because he's the one who operates the ferry boat. The ferry boat is the Cha boat. In Akan, the ferry boat is also called Cha, which means a cutter, to cut. It cuts across the water. It doesn't go with the river, it goes across. Cha means to cut, and Cha is the ferry boat. In ancient Kemet, Chawi is the ferry boat. It's the same word with the same meaning. It's the ferry boat that cuts. So Cha, the divine Chawi, is the divine ferryman of the Ma'a boat. Notice that Budge translated it as the Ma'at boat, the boatman of Ma'at. But here you can see Chawi is the name. You have the sickle and the elevation of earth and the open palm and forearm. It's the Ma'a Mchent. It's the Ma'a boat. The boat of the ferryman is the Ma'a boat. It says divine Chawi, divine ferryman of the Ma'a boat of Sekhet Aru, the divine fields of peace. This Pepi is Ma'a, true before or under heaven, before under heaven, before under earth. This Pepi is Ma'a, under this island of earth. He swam to that which is between the thighs of Nut. And in this text with Neferkara, it says Pepi Neferkara, this Pu, so it means this Pepi Neferkara is Ma'a. And you see the sickle, the elevation of earth, the open palm with the forearm, and you see the falcon on the standard. The falcon on the standard represents a deity. So he's saying, I am like Ma'a, the deity Ma'a. Just like They'll say, I'm like the deity Al-Sar. This Pepi is Al-Sar. He lived in harmony with order, just like Al-Sar did. Then he says, this Pepi is true. This Pepi is upright. This Pepi is like the deity Maa. And the deity Maa is mentioned here. It's not just the word Maa meaning law or truth. It's Maa with the determinative of the falcon on the standard showing it's a deity. So in the earliest text religious compositions in existence, you have the male deity Maa being referenced as the divine ferryman who regulates the boat of Maa. And the whole texting in the Runupert and Meru, the so-called Book of the Dead, is dealing with the deity Maa. That interrogatory, that series of questions you have to pass, you must sit in front of Maa. He asks you a bunch of questions, you have to answer them correctly. If you answer them correctly, he will ferry you across that line of demarcation between the physical world and the spirit realm to get you to the pristine community of the ancestresses and ancestors. It's dealing with that ferry boat and crossing one side to the other, that line of balance, just like the sunrise and sunset, the upper realm and the lower realm, the earthly realm and the underworld and so forth. Ma'a and Ma'at are at sunrise and sunset, the balancing points of the day. They're at the spring equinox and the autumn equinox, the balancing points of the year. They govern the line of demarcation between the upper world and the underworld and so forth. They are the twin balancing forces in creation. When you live in harmony with them, you are balanced. If you're just focused on Ma'at and you don't know Ma'a exists, then you are imbalanced. If you don't invoke the male divinity of divine law and balance and you're a male, you're going to be perpetually imbalanced. So that's common knowledge for people engaged in ritual culture authentically. They already know who Ma'a is in their various traditions. But of course, he exists, and we can show him in late period texts, in the Runupert and Meru, which is the new empire and so forth. We can show him in the pyramid text, all aspects of Kemet from all periods, the male divinity Ma'a exists, always has. People who still have a Eurocentric mindset, they never even stop to look. And then that lack of authenticity in ritual, they were not inclined or pushed or in tune enough or focused enough to pay attention when the divinity was trying to get them to embrace the fullness of the culture. So that's just an example of when you engage the ritual process, you have a different understanding of these texts. It's not just, you can read the text that says Ma'a and it means law, but when you invoke that actual divinity, you have a totally different understanding. So we just wanted to put that in as an aside. But the important piece here for today, we had to go through those building blocks, monoliterals, biliterals, quadrangular forms, and so forth. And then the final piece, which of course we'll start off with next week, just like you have biliterals, two sounds like the B and the A becomes Ba. Then the final piece, of course, is the triliterals. And you have a list of triliterals. So it's 3 sounds. So you have monoliterals, biliterals, and triliterals. Triliterals are those phonograms that represent 3 consonantal signs. The language contains approximately 75 triliterals, and they need to be memorized, and they simply list them. Once again, you'll see these images. They'll give that phonetic sound, what they approximate the sound is, and those are, the glyphs that need to be memorized. And you can go throughout the week and just going through these pages, the pages 40 through 49, and you'll be memorizing these monoliterals, biliterals, and triliterals. And you don't have to have them all memorized by next week, of course, but at least this is the reference. You go through them to become familiar. So when we start translating texts, you'll remember some of them, but then if you don't remember one, then you'll go back to the list, find it, and like, oh, that was Seba. Okay, put this here, and then you'll go back. But you need to know what these are and what they represent. For example, Uben meaning sunshine, or Seba meaning a star, and Wajen meaning a tongue of land, and On meaning a column, and so forth. The more and more you look at them, the more you'll understand that. Because once you we go through the monoliterals, triliterals, and biliterals and triliterals. Then we get into the reading of the language. Just like you have to learn the alphabet first. That's the first thing. Learn the alphabet, ABC, and what the sounds make. Then you can start putting together the words. B, ba, a, and t, bat, and so forth. But first you have to learn the alphabet, the sounds, what they mean. In ancient Kemet, you learn the sounds, but also the images and what they mean. And when we look at the images, for example, like Kepler, represented by a beetle, when you look at the behavior of a beetle and watch a video on the way the dung beetle behaves and so forth, you gain insight into the cosmology. That's different than just a letter in English that represents ka. When we have a symbol that represents a sound, but it's also an animal, it's a cosmological function. So we study the behavior of the animal to gain greater insight. Or look at the function of one of these tools. You see the Nefer symbol with the trachea and the heart. What is the relationship between the heart-lung complex? How do they work together? And why is Nefer, representative of the trachea and the heart working together, the heart-lung complex? The respiratory and circulatory system working together, centered in the heart-lung complex, you have greater understanding. And we're going to get into all of that, but just to give you an example, not only the sounds, but the functions of those symbols. And then we get into cosmology. So we went over a little bit, of course. This is the first class. We just wanted to go through that information. But next week, we'll go through the rest of the biliterals and triliterals just to, go over them. But then we'll start getting into forming these words, phonetic complements and determinatives and so forth. So you can start looking at some text and saying, oh, this is what this text is saying. All right. So it'll be a mixture of the language as well as the cosmology, as well as understanding ritual practice and so forth. Okay. So first class is always a lot of information, foundational information. If you have any questions, of course, you can post any questions in the chat room if anybody has any questions. I will, I'm going to send everybody a link. I'll send you a link. I'll send you the PDF link. I'll make sure the link is working. For some reason, it wasn't uploading for some reason, but I'll make sure the link is working. And so you can download the book yourself. You can read the book yourself. I'll send that out later tonight. And also we will, this will be uploading, and at some point tomorrow it'll be uploaded, and then we will send you the link to this video and the passcode so you can rewatch it and review it whenever you want to. There's no expiration date on when you can watch that. Okay, so no questions. I don't see any questions in the chat room. Or if you want to unmute yourself, if you have any questions. Just want to make sure we're not missing anybody. Okay, so if there's no questions, we could go ahead and end. I know we went over a little bit, a half an hour, but so yeah, I'll send that out. If you know of anybody who would like to still do late registration for the class, they can still register because, like I said, we're gonna upload this video with the link and passcode for those who register. So anybody who missed the class, and even yourself, if you missed a class or a portion of a class, you'll always be able to come back and watch the video at any time you want to. So if somebody wants to do the late registration, you can let them know. Of course, Afro-Akani people, African Black people only, and they can do the late registration. We're going to send out a notice about that, but just let people know if they still are interested. Okay. So I know I overloaded everybody with information tonight, but we're going to go through, we're going to get through it all. So since there are no questions, we're going to go ahead and end it here. Yedase, we thank you for joining in. If you have any questions, send an email to kwesiakhan@gmail.com, same email I sent out your course registration information through. And Yebeshiabio, we will meet again. That's it. Oh, did you have questions? Okay.